He was just a struggling single dad, lost in a blizzard with two daughters and no one to call. The truck had broken down, the cold was creeping in, and hope was running out. But then, a lost dog appeared from the snow-covered trees. What followed wasn't just survival. It was the beginning of something they never saw coming. Warmth, healing, and a love that would rewrite their story. Before we dive in, if heartwarming stories of kindness, second chances, and unexpected love are your kind of escape, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It's a small click for you, but it helps us bring more stories like this to life. Now let me tell you a story that begins with a storm and ends with something truly unforgettable. Struggling single dad and daughters trapped in a blizzard. A lost dog leads them to a hidden estate. The Montana highway stretched like a frozen ribbon through a wilderness blanketed in white. Snow fell in thick, lazy spirals, brushing across the windshield of Ben Hollis's beat-up pickup truck, like silent reminders of how far they still had to go, and how far they'd already fallen. Inside the cab, the heater rattled with the effort of staying alive, spitting out barely lukewarm air. 9-year-old Ellie sat curled beneath a faded wool blanket, her head resting against the cold glass. Beside her, little Rosie sucked her thumb and whispered lullabies to her doll, bundled up in a knitted scarf twice its size. Neither girl complained. They never did. Ben's calloused hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as the snow thickened. His knuckles were red and dry, cracked from weeks of working odd jobs and changing flat tires in the bitter cold. The truck gave a wheeze as it hit a patch of ice, and he slowed, heart knocking once in his chest. "Just a little further," he muttered, not sure if he was talking to the truck or himself. There was no road sign in sight, just trees, skeletal, shivering, and the suffocating stillness of nature buried in midwinter silence. They had left Livingston before sunrise, fleeing a town that had run out of kindness, or maybe just run out of room for a man like him. When the hardware store closed and the landlord raised the rent, Ben knew they couldn't stay. He'd sold what little they had, an old lawnmower, the dining table, Rosie's crib, and packed their lives into the truck. All he had left now was two daughters, a cooler full of peanut butter sandwiches, and a prayer whispered into the frost. The snow was coming down harder now, and the sky had turned the color of old steel. Visibility dropped to 20 feet, then 10. The truck began to grumble, the engine coughing like an old smoker. Ben tapped the gas gently. Nothing. "Come on, old girl," he said. "Don't give up on me." Then, a sputter, a jolt, and silence. The engine died. The dashboard lights blinked once, then went out. Ben cursed under his breath and turned the key again. Nothing. Just the whine of the starter and the low moan of wind pressing against the windows like a warning. Ellie stirred behind him. "Daddy, are we stopping here?" Ben turned and forced a smile. The kind of smile a man makes when he wants to hide the sound of everything breaking. "Just taking a little break, sweetheart," he said. "Gotta give the truck a minute." "Is it because she's tired too?" Rosie asked, her voice sleepy. Ben nodded. "Yeah, she's been working hard today. Just needs a rest." He climbed out into the snow. The wind sliced into him like tiny blades. He popped the hood and stared into the steaming maze of wires and rusted metal. Useless. He knew engines. This one had fought hard, but she was done. They were stuck, in the middle of nowhere. No cell service, no signal on the dash. No one knew they were out here. Ben slammed the hood shut and rested his forehead against the cold metal, eyes closed. "Don't do this now," he whispered. "Not with them in the back seat. Not like this." When he turned around, he saw Ellie had cracked open her window, her face pale beneath her knit hat. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" He nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just needs to cool off. We'll be on our way soon." He climbed back into the truck and wrapped both girls in the blanket, pulling them close. The inside was already cooling fast. He didn't dare let them fall asleep for too long, not without heat. Ellie's voice was soft. "I'm not scared. As long as we're together, it's okay." Ben looked at his daughter, so small, trying to be brave for her little sister. His throat tightened. He kissed the top of her head. And then they heard it. A noise outside, faint at first, then more distinct. Crunching snow, a low, wet panting, something moving toward them. Ben stiffened. Then a paw slapped against the driver's side door. Rosie squeaked and buried herself under the blanket. Ellie peeked over Ben's arm. Ben squinted through the snow-covered glass. A large dog stood there, golden fur matted with ice, its ribs faintly showing beneath the coat. It wasn't barking. It wasn't growling. It was staring. Ben slowly rolled down the window a few inches. The dog stepped back, then took 2 strides into the falling snow, and paused. It turned its head toward the woods, then looked back at Ben. It wanted them to follow. Ben stared at it, his breath fogging up the air. Was this crazy? Yes. Was it dangerous? Probably. But staying here wasn't an option. The cold was already curling around them like a serpent. Ellie's small hand wrapped around his wrist. Daddy, maybe it knows where to go. Ben looked into his daughter's eyes, then into the storm, and nodded. The moment Ben opened the door, a wave of cold slammed into the truck like a physical force, sharp and biting. Snow swirled in the dim light, catching on the edges of his coat, stinging his cheeks like icy needles. The dog stood just a few feet away, its breath fogging in the air, ears perked. It didn't move, but its tail gave a cautious flick. Not wagging, not quite hostile, just alert. Ben stepped out slowly, shutting the door behind him. He didn't want to let the cold sink into the cab more than it already had. From behind the foggy window, Ellie and Rosie stared with wide, anxious eyes. He crouched a little. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, careful not to frighten it. "Where'd you come from?" The dog gave a soft huff, then turned and trotted ahead, a few paces into the whiteness, before pausing and looking back. Ben hesitated. The blizzard was thickening by the minute. Snow was already collecting on his boots, rising past the soles. But something in the animal's body language struck him. It wasn't random. This dog wasn't just wandering. It was waiting. He glanced back at the truck. "I'm not leaving them," he said aloud. "Not unless—" The dog barked once, sharp and urgent, before taking another few steps and turning again. Ben made a decision. He jumped back into the truck, where the air was already colder than he liked. Ellie looked up at him. "What did it want?" "I don't know," Ben said. "But it seems to want us to follow." Rosie's lip trembled. "Is it safe?" Ben hesitated for half a breath. "I think so," he said finally. "I think it might be trying to help." The words sounded absurd even to him. But there was something in that dog's eyes. Something that didn't look like randomness or desperation. It looked like purpose. And in this kind of storm, you don't ignore purpose when it finds you. "We're going to go together," he said, grabbing his thickest flannel, wrapping Rosie tightly in it, and then bundling both girls in the blanket again. "But you have to stay close, hold each other's hands, and walk where I walk. Okay?" They nodded, eyes wide but trusting. He carried Rosie in one arm, slung a backpack with their few remaining supplies over one shoulder, and took Ellie's gloved hand in his other. Then they stepped out into the storm. The dog, waiting just beyond the reach of the headlights, turned and began to lead them. Ben followed. The forest swallowed them almost immediately. The headlights from the truck vanished behind them within minutes, consumed by thick snow and tall trees that groaned under the weight of winter. The dog kept just ahead, never running, never lagging, always just far enough to be seen. Occasionally it stopped, looked back, and moved again. "Daddy," Ellie whispered, "how does it know where to go?" "I don't know, honey," he said. "Maybe it's going home." Does it have a home?" she asked, and something in her voice tugged at him. He glanced down. "I hope so." The trees opened slightly as they reached a ridge, and for a moment the sky above cleared enough for him to glimpse a faint outline of mountains in the distance, like old giants watching in silence. Then, through the curtain of snow, Ben saw it, a light. It was faint at first, almost a trick of the eyes. But then a second appeared, a warm glow, yellow and steady, flickering through the branches like a promise. The dog stopped at the top of a small slope, tail wagging this time, and waited. Ben's breath caught. "Is that—" The girls followed his gaze. "It's a house," Ellie whispered. "No, not a house. A mansion." As they descended the slope, the full image emerged. A vast stone estate, its architecture old and elegant, hidden deep within the forest. Windows glowed with warm light. Smoke curled from a chimney. It looked like something out of a painting. surreal and impossibly well-timed, a relic of a world they'd never belonged to. The dog led them up a narrow stone path flanked by snow-covered hedges and frozen statues. The front door was tall and dark, framed by stone columns with one warm porch light flickering against the storm. Ben paused at the base of the steps, heart pounding. No one just stumbled on a place like this. Still, what choice did they have? He set Rosie down gently on the step beside Ellie, then knocked. Once, twice. No sound. He knocked again, louder. Snow clung to his beard, his coat soaked through. Behind the heavy wooden door, something moved. A shadow. Then the door creaked open, just a few inches. A woman stood there wrapped in a thick gray cardigan. Her dark hair was swept back loosely, and though her face was pale and sharp-boned, her eyes were alert, intelligent, and suspicious. Ben opened his mouth to speak, but the cold robbed him of eloquence. "I'm sorry," he said, voice hoarse. "We're stuck out here. Our truck died. The storm. I've got 2 little girls with me. We didn't know where else." Her eyes shifted to the children, then to the dog, now sitting patiently at her feet. Her lips parted slightly. "Scout?" The dog stood, ears up, tail thumping once, and stepped toward her. The change in her face was small but unmistakable. Surprise, then confusion, then something softening behind her eyes. She looked up again at Ben. Her voice was low, almost reluctant. "You'd better come in." The door opened wider with a reluctant creak, revealing the warm golden interior of the stone estate. The heat rolled out like a soft tide, brushing against Ben's frozen skin, making his eyes sting. He gently nudged Ellie and Rosie forward. The woman stepped aside but kept her hand on the edge of the door, like someone holding back a current. The moment they stepped in, the smell hit him. Cedar wood, old stone, and something faintly floral, like lavender tucked inside a drawer. The heavy door shut behind them with a deep thunk, muffling the blizzard outside. The silence that followed was dense, almost reverent. The dog, Scout, walked straight past them and sat at the foot of a grand wooden staircase, tail swishing the polished floor like he'd never left. The woman didn't smile. She didn't speak, not right away. She watched them with measured eyes that had clearly known grief and learned to live behind fences. Ben removed his snow-caked coat, trying not to drip too much on the intricate rug beneath them. He helped Ellie out of hers, then gently unwrapped Rosie from the flannel blanket. The woman's gaze softened slightly at the sight of the little girls. "We didn't mean to intrude," Ben said, voice low and respectful. "The truck broke down about 2 miles back. We were stuck, and the dog, your dog, I guess, he found us." She looked at Scout, then at Ben again. "He's been missing for 2 days. I think he saved our lives." She gave a small nod, almost involuntary. Then, as if remembering something, she turned and walked down the hallway. Ben stood there awkwardly, unsure if he was meant to follow. Then her voice called from around the corner. "Bring them to the sitting room, east side, and take off their boots." He followed the voice through a wide corridor lined with oil paintings and bookshelves. The ceilings were high and beamed, the wood dark and old, creaking softly underfoot. It didn't feel like a modern mansion, more like something built a century ago and kept breathing by sheer will. The sitting room was a dream. A fire crackled in a stone hearth the size of a small car, casting shadows across walls lined with books. Worn armchairs and a grand piano that hadn't been played in years. A kettle hissed on a cast-iron stove nearby. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the sofa. "They're freezing." Ben lifted Rosie into his lap and Ellie curled beside him, both of them gravitating instinctively toward the warmth. The woman returned with 3 heavy wool blankets and a tray of mismatched mugs. She handed them cocoa, real cocoa, not powdered, and a plate of shortbread cookies that looked handmade. "I didn't catch your name," she said, finally taking a seat across from them in a high-backed chair, legs crossed, expression guarded. "Ben Hollis," he said, extending a hand. "These are my girls, Ellie and Rosie." She nodded but didn't reach out. Sadie Westmore." The name pinged something distant in Ben's memory, but he let it pass. "Thank you," he said. "I know this is a lot." Sadie's gaze lingered on the children. "How long were you stuck?" "Truck gave out late afternoon. We sat there for a couple of hours before Scout showed up. She looked at the dog, who had now curled up contentedly by the fire. And before that? Ben hesitated. Been on the road a couple days, heading north, looking for work, housing, a chance. Sadie didn't reply. Ellie, bolder now that warmth had returned to her fingers, looked around. This house is really big. Sadie's lips twitched, almost a smile. It's been in my family for generations. Do you live here all by yourself? Ellie asked innocently. Sadie's eyes flicked toward the fireplace, where shadows danced. Yes. Rosie, half asleep, mumbled. It's like a castle. And it did feel like that. Not a cold, echoing fortress, but a forgotten castle in the woods, haunted not by ghosts but by memories. The kind of place that had once held laughter and piano music and Christmas lights, and now held only quiet. Ben cleared his throat. We'll head out in the morning. If the weather eases, I can try to get the truck running again. You'll freeze before you get halfway, Sadie said flatly. The storm won't let up until late tomorrow. You'll stay tonight. There was no warmth in her tone, just fact. Ben nodded. We'll sleep on the floor if we need to. This is already more than I could ask. Sadie stood. There's a guest room down the hall, 2 twin beds and a cot. It hasn't been used in a while, but it's clean. Ben blinked. You're sure? She paused in the doorway. Scout brought you here. I trust him. And with that, she disappeared down the hallway, her cardigan trailing behind her like a shadow. Ben exhaled slowly. Is she a fairy godmother? Ellie whispered. Ben chuckled under his breath. I don't think so. She has a sad face, Ellie said quietly. Ben looked toward the fire where Scout was snoring gently. Yeah, he murmured. She does. That night, after Rosie and Ellie were tucked under thick quilts in the guest room, Ben sat on the edge of the cot, staring at the frost-laced window. The storm outside howled like a wild animal, but in here all was still. Safe. He didn't know why the dog had come, why this house had been waiting, hidden in the woods like something out of a storybook, why this woman, reclusive and remote, had let them in. But he felt something stir, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Ben had never known such stillness. He lay awake on the cot beneath a thick quilt, the room dim except for the soft amber glow of a lamp near the dresser. Ellie breathed deeply on the bed to his left, one hand resting lightly on Rosie's chest beside her. Both girls had fallen asleep within minutes. Their small bodies finally relaxed, wrapped in warmth and comfort they'd long forgotten. It was quiet in a way that felt sacred, the kind of silence only found in homes that remembered how to listen. Ben stared up at the wooden beams overhead, their rough grain catching the light. This house, this place, didn't make sense. Not in the way the rest of the world worked. It felt like stepping out of time. He'd meant to leave the minute the sun broke through the clouds. That had been his plan. But already, just a few hours in, the house was doing something to him, to them. It reminded him what warmth felt like. Not just from the fire, but from the possibility that someone still cared. Somewhere down the hall, a door clicked softly. Ben swung his legs over the cot and stood, pulling a flannel shirt over his undershirt. He padded into the hallway, careful not to wake the girls. The air smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. Downstairs, faint light flickered beneath the doorway to the sitting room. He stepped closer and, after a moment's hesitation, knocked gently. Sadie's voice answered. It's open. He entered. She sat curled sideways in the high-backed chair, her legs tucked beneath her, robe wrapped tightly around her shoulders. In her lap was an old hardcover book, spine worn and pages yellowed. The fire had dwindled to low embers, casting long shadows on her face. You couldn't sleep either, she said. Ben shook his head. Too much quiet. I'm not used to it. Sadie didn't look up. Most people aren't. Not anymore. Ben lingered by the doorway for a second before easing into the armchair opposite hers. The cushions sighed beneath his weight. Girls are out like a couple of lights, he said. I think Rosie would have slept on the staircase if you let her. She hasn't been this warm in weeks. Sadie closed the book gently, resting it on the table beside her. They seem steady, resilient. They had to be. Life didn't give them much of a choice. And when she gave a faint nod, her expression unreadable. A log shifted in the fireplace. The glow kissed her cheek, revealing soft lines at the corners of her mouth. The kind formed by laughter once frequent, now long absent. "You live here alone?" Ben asked. Sadie hesitated. "Yes." "How long?" She exhaled, eyes fixed on the flames. "3 winters." He waited. "My parents left it to me," she continued quietly. "After they passed, I tried to sell it. Couldn't. Then I tried to rent it, but no one wanted to live this far off the grid. Eventually, I just stayed. Scout was the only one who didn't seem to mind." Ben looked toward the fireplace, his voice gentle. "He found us, you know, like he knew we were in trouble." "He's always had that sense," she murmured. A pause. Ben studied her face in profile. Thoughtful, sharp, and yet burdened by something he couldn't quite name. "You don't get many visitors out here, do you?" "None," she said. "Then why'd you let us in?" Her eyes met his. For a moment, neither of them looked away. "Because 2 little girls were freezing in my woods," she said, "and because Scout brought you. That means something." Ben gave a slow nod. Sadie stood then, walking to the fireplace. She stirred the embers with the iron poker, adding another log. The flames licked upward, glowing brighter. "I used to think places like this could keep the world out," she said, voice low. "But it doesn't work that way. Grief finds you, no matter how thick the walls are." Ben sat still, the weight of her words settling deep. He knew that kind of grief, the kind that crept into your bones, the kind that built a room inside your chest and stayed there, quiet but heavy. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," he said. "Breast cancer. Took everything fast. We didn't even get a full year after the diagnosis." Sadie turned to face him, something shifting in her expression. "I didn't tell the girls the truth at first," Ben continued. "Said she went to stay with her sister for a while. But kids, they know, even when they don't have words for it." Sadie came back to her chair and lowered herself slowly, her posture less guarded now. "I lost my son," she said simply. 2 winters ago. He was 12. Sledding accident." The words landed with a quiet thud between them. Ben's breath caught. "I'm sorry," he said. Sadie nodded once, the firelight catching the gloss in her eyes before she looked away. "I stopped writing after that," she added. "I was a novelist, not famous, but enough to keep the lights on. After, I couldn't string 2 sentences together, so I came here and stayed." They sat in silence, bound not by shared details, but by a deeper understanding of what it meant to lose the very center of your world. After a while, Sadie spoke again. "I didn't mean to keep you this long. You should get some sleep." Ben stood, but not before offering something soft. "Thank you for letting us stay." Sadie didn't respond right away. As he turned toward the door, she said quietly, "Don't be in a rush to leave tomorrow. The storm's not done, and neither, I think, are you." Ben paused in the doorway, the fire's glow behind him. He nodded once, slowly, and for the first time in a long while, as he made his way back upstairs, Ben didn't feel like a man merely surviving. He felt like someone who had stepped inside a story that wasn't finished yet. By morning, the storm had buried the world. Ben woke to a soft hush pressing against the windows, like the sky itself had laid a thick white blanket over the forest. Outside, the snow was deep enough to swallow the truck whole. The roads, if they were still roads, had disappeared under an ocean of ice and drift. Inside the guest room, the air was warm and filled with the quiet sound of children breathing. Ellie was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the bed, gently brushing Rosie's hair with her fingers. She looked up as Ben stirred. "Daddy," she whispered, "is this really someone's house? Or is it magic?" Ben smiled faintly, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "I'm starting to wonder the same thing." Downstairs, the fire was burning again, the hearth crackling with fresh logs. Scout was curled up in his usual spot, tail twitching at some unseen dream. But Sadie was nowhere in sight. A folded note rested on the kitchen table beside a loaf of fresh bread and a pot of still warm oatmeal. In Sadie's precise, flowing handwriting, "Please help yourselves. I'll be gone for a few hours. S." Ben frowned. Gone? In this weather? He checked the back door. No new prints in the snow. No vehicle tracks either. Just the untouched stretch of white and the soundless trees. She had vanished into the house, it seemed. into some hidden room or memory that did not welcome guests. "Where'd she go?" Ellie asked, her voice small as she came into the kitchen. Ben didn't answer right away. He stirred the oatmeal, served them each a warm bowl, and motioned toward the bench near the window. "Let's give her some space." But Ellie wasn't the kind to stop asking. "Is she mad at us?" "No," Ben said gently. "She's just someone who's used to being alone." Rosie piped up with a yawn. "Maybe she's lonely." Ben didn't argue, because part of him suspected Rosie was right. After breakfast, the girls begged to explore the house. Ben hesitated. They were guests, not explorers. But the storm outside made going anywhere else impossible. And there was something in the girl's eyes that reminded him what it meant to feel wonder again. "Stay inside," he said. "Don't touch anything breakable." Ellie saluted. "Yes, sir." Rosie simply giggled and took off barefoot down the hallway, her curls bouncing behind her like a trail of laughter. Ben sat by the fireplace trying to resist the calm. He should have been worrying about the truck, the next town, their future. But here, in this place carved out of grief and silence, his daughters were laughing. That had to mean something. Upstairs, the girls discovered a small library with arched windows and faded velvet curtains. Dust danced in the air like tiny ghosts of the past. A globe stood in the corner, its edges worn, and shelves of books lined the walls. Many with Sadie's name on the spine. "Look," Ellie gasped. "That's her. She's a writer." Rosie tilted her head. "But why does she look so sad now?" Ellie pulled one book down, The Valley Between Us, and flipped through the first few pages. "Maybe we can help her write again," she said. Rosie nodded. "Or smile again." As they browsed, the girls stumbled upon a door slightly ajar. It creaked as Ellie pushed it open. Inside was a child's bedroom, untouched, dustless, like it had been waiting. A wooden model train rested on the floor, frozen mid-loop. A baseball glove lay on the nightstand. On the wall, a hand-drawn picture in crayon read, "Mommy plus me plus Scout." The silence turned heavy. Rosie clung to Ellie's arm. "This was her boys' room." Ellie didn't answer. She just reached over and gently closed the door. Some things didn't need to be said aloud. When Sadie finally returned, or rather reappeared, it was near dusk. She emerged from a small hallway Ben hadn't noticed before, carrying an old basket of firewood. Her cardigan was dusted with ash, and her expression unreadable. "I didn't hear you come in," Ben said, rising from the sofa. "Old service stairwell," she replied shortly. "Leads to the cellar. I keep the dry wood there." She walked to the hearth and added a few fresh logs, her movements precise, practiced. "The girls explored a little," Ben said. "I hope that's okay." Sadie didn't look at him. "This house is too big to hide forever." There was a pause. "They found the library," he added gently. Sadie's hands paused over the logs. "They saw your books," he said. "They were impressed." "I haven't touched a manuscript in 2 years," she said, voice flat. "Maybe it's not about the writing," Ben offered. "Maybe it's about what comes after." Sadie stood slowly, brushing ash from her hands. Her eyes flicked toward him, not unkindly but guarded. "I let you in for one night, Mr. Hollis. I didn't invite you to fix me." "I wasn't trying to," Ben said quietly. "But you let us in, and I think that says something." Sadie opened her mouth, then closed it. Scout lifted his head from the hearth and let out a quiet sigh, as if sensing the weight between them. "I'm making dinner," Sadie said, turning to leave the room. "You're welcome to join. But after tomorrow, we'll need to talk about your next steps." Ben nodded, not pushing further. He understood. Some people needed time. Some wounds weren't meant to be rushed. But even so, a part of her had opened the door, and a part of him, the part still aching from the long years of survival, had felt the first flicker of something he hadn't dared to feel in a very long time. The beginning of belonging. That night, the snow continued to fall in whispers. Dinner was quiet, but not cold. The large oak dining table, which likely hadn't hosted a meal in years, had come alive with the clinking of spoons and the soft chatter of 2 little girls. Sadie had served a simple stew, hearty, rich with thyme and root vegetables. Ellie declared it the best meal she'd had since Halloween. Rosie ate with the kind of focus only a 6-year-old with an empty belly could muster. Sadie barely touched her bowl. Ben noticed but didn't mention it. Afterward, the girls helped clear the dishes, and Ben guided them back upstairs for bedtime. He read a few pages from an old children's book he'd found in the library, his voice soft against the muffled silence of the storm outside. Ellie was asleep before he turned the second page. Rosie lasted a little longer, long enough to whisper, "Is she going to be our friend?" Ben kissed her forehead. "Maybe. Sometimes people don't know they need friends until someone gives them one." Downstairs, the fire was still burning when Ben returned to the sitting room. Sadie sat alone on the floor in front of the hearth, legs tucked beneath her, a worn quilt draped around her shoulders. She didn't turn when he entered. "I made tea," she said simply, her voice low. Ben sat across from her on the rug, accepting the mug she handed him. Chamomile, a little honey. The kind of drink you only made for someone when you didn't want to talk, but didn't want them to leave either. They drank in silence. The fire crackled softly. Beyond the walls, the wind sighed through the trees. Finally, Sadie spoke. "You remind me of someone." Ben looked at her, brow raised. "My husband," she said. "Daniel. He was a carpenter, too. Not fancy, just good with his hands, and good with people, even the broken ones." Ben lowered his eyes. "What happened?" "He died of a heart attack 6 years ago. Quick, in his sleep. One minute he was talking about spring repairs. The next morning he was just gone." She didn't flinch as she said it. There was no theatrical pause, no attempt to tug emotion out of the air. It was a statement of fact, heavy with time and quiet sorrow. Ben nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." "Everyone says that," she murmured, staring into the fire. "And it's kind. It really is. But no one tells you that after a while, the sorry stops. People move on. They expect you to move on too." Ben let the words settle between them. "I lost my wife to cancer," he said after a moment. "She was 34. We had 6 months after the diagnosis. Ellie was just 6. Rosie was 3. Sadie turned to look at him. There was no pity in her expression, only recognition, the kind of understanding that didn't need explanation. "I thought I'd prepared myself," he said, "for the funeral, for the empty bed. But no one prepares you for all the small griefs, like making one less plate at dinner, or folding laundry and finding a shirt she hadn't worn in months." Sadie's gaze drifted to the flames again. "Or walking past a room you can't bring yourself to pack up." Ben hesitated. "The boys' room upstairs." "Ethan," she said softly. "He loved trains, dinosaurs, Scout. He died on the hill behind the house, sledding alone. I was inside, folding laundry. I still hear the thud sometimes, in my dreams." Ben didn't speak. He couldn't. He just let the weight of her words fill the room, felt them crack something in his chest. "I stopped writing after that," she continued. "My agent called. My editor. I ignored them all. They didn't understand. The only stories I could think of ended the same way, with someone alone." Ben met her eyes. "But this story hasn't ended." She gave him a sad smile. "You say that like you believe it." "I do," he said simply, "because we're sitting here, talking, breathing. That counts for something." Sadie looked down at her tea, fingers wrapped tightly around the mug. "You're a better man than you think, Ben Hollis." He chuckled dryly. "I'm not sure about that. You walked 2 miles in a blizzard to save your daughters. You trusted a strange dog, and you haven't asked me for anything except shelter." Ben looked up at her. "I don't need much, just a safe place for them to sleep." Sadie's voice softened. "You gave them more than safety. You gave them love." A long pause stretched between them. Then Sadie reached for the teapot again, refilling both mugs without asking. Outside, the storm continued to breathe against the windows, but inside, the silence between them had shifted. It wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was the quiet of two souls recognizing each other, not for what they'd lost, but for what remained. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Its light spilled across the snow-covered landscape like a silent blessing, catching on the frost-laced trees and making them shimmer like crystal. The forest that had once felt ominous now looked like something from a snow globe, frozen, delicate, and utterly still. Ben stood at the window of the guest room, one hand resting on the old wooden frame. Below, the truck was barely visible under a thick crust of snow, but it was the sky that caught his attention. Pale blue, cloudless, and impossibly vast. The storm had passed. That meant they had to go. Behind him, Ellie sat quietly on the bed, braiding Rosie's hair. The younger girl hummed to herself, kicking her socked feet rhythmically. "Do we have to leave today?" Ellie asked without looking up. Ben turned. "The weather's clear. It'll be safer now. We should get the truck running while we've got daylight." Rosie frowned. "But I like it here." Ben gave a soft smile. "I know, sweet pea. But this was always going to be temporary." Downstairs, the kitchen had already been tidied. The fire was lit, the kettle steaming, but Sadie was absent. Again. Ben had come to recognize this pattern. Warmth given in small doses, then distance. She never disappeared rudely, but she always gave just enough space to remind them, "This is not your home." Scout padded into the room and rested his head on Rosie's knee. She leaned down and hugged him without saying a word. Ben stepped out to the porch, where the sun hit him like a foreign sensation. The air was still frigid, but the wind had died. He began brushing snow off the truck, his fingers stiff and slow, his thoughts heavier than the work required. They could leave now. They should leave. And yet, he kept thinking about the conversation in front of the fire, about Sadie's voice when she'd said Ethan's name, about how she hadn't flinched when Rosie climbed into her lap the night before to show her a drawing of Scout, how Sadie had rested her hand, just briefly, on the child's back. A door creaked open behind him. Sadie stood in the doorway, her robe pulled tight, arms folded. "You'll need chains if you plan to get out of here," she said. "The north road is still iced over." Ben nodded. "I've got some. Truck's old, but she's stubborn." A pause. "Fuel?" "3/4 of a tank." She nodded again but didn't move. Ben stepped closer. "We'll be out of your hair soon. I just wanted to say thank you." Sadie looked out over the woods. "Scout likes your girls." "They like him too." She shifted her weight. "They're good kids. Kind. Polite." Ben smiled. "That's mostly their mother's doing. I just try not to mess it up." Sadie didn't smile back, but something softened in her expression. "I haven't had laughter in this house for a long time," she said quietly. "I forgot what it sounded like." Ben didn't respond. He wasn't sure he needed to. Sadie looked down the steps. "They'll remember this place. Children always remember the first time they feel safe again." He swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "So will I." She turned, then stopped. "I made sandwiches. For the road." He nodded. "Thank you." But she was already gone. They packed slowly, almost reluctantly. Rosie insisted on folding every blanket neatly, even though Ben told her Sadie probably didn't care. "She gave us cocoa," Rosie said. "That means she cares." Ellie wrote a short note on a piece of scrap paper from the library. "Thank you for letting us stay. I think Ethan would have liked Scout bringing us here. Love, Ellie." She left it on the fireplace mantel, just beside one of Sadie's unopened books. Ben carried the girls to the truck one by one, setting them gently in the cab, wrapping the blanket tight around their legs. The engine groaned to life after a few long tries. He let it warm while he checked the tires, adjusted the chains. Sadie didn't come out. Ben walked back inside for one last check. The house was as quiet as it had been the first night, as if it had returned to sleep the moment they decided to leave. Scout stood at the base of the staircase, tail low, ears back. Ben knelt down. "Take care of her, okay?" The dog whined, stepped forward, and nudged Ben's shoulder gently before turning and trotting toward the west wing. He was halfway to the truck when he heard footsteps behind him. "Wait," Sadie called, her voice thin but steady. Ben turned. She stood on the porch holding something wrapped in an old dish towel. "These are cookies. The girls seem to like them." He took them, heart tugging. "They'll love them. Thank you." Another pause. "I'm not great with goodbyes," she said. Ben nodded. "Then don't say one. Just say until next time." She looked at him long and hard, and then for the first time she smiled. It was small, tentative, but real. "Until next time," she said. He tipped his head. "Take care, Sadie." "You too, Ben Hollis." He climbed into the truck. Ellie waved from the back seat. Rosie blew a kiss. Sadie raised her hand. The truck pulled away, wheels crunching through the thawing snow. The mansion grew smaller in the rearview mirror. The forest opened again. But the warmth, the quiet miracle of the days they'd spent inside those walls, it clung to them like sunlight on their skin. And for the first time in a long time, Ben wasn't just driving towards something uncertain. He was driving away from something sacred and hoping somehow they'd find their way back. The house was too quiet. The laughter was gone. The scent of cocoa and peanut butter sandwiches lingered in the kitchen like a memory refusing to fade. The guest room door stood slightly ajar, the beds neatly made, the corners tucked in with surprising care. Ellie's handiwork, Sadie guessed. A small drawing had been left on the nightstand. 3 stick figures, 1 tall man, 2 little girls, and a golden dog with floppy ears. A simple scrawl in blue marker underneath. "Thank you, Miss Sadie. Love, Rosie." Sadie stared at it longer than she meant to. It was nearly noon, and the snow outside was melting in slow rivulets, dripping from the eaves and pooling beneath the porch steps. A few chickadees had returned to the trees, chirping like they hadn't known what silence was. Sadie sat at the kitchen table, tea growing cold beside her. Scout lay at her feet, restless, ears twitching at every creak of the old pipes. "You miss them too," she said softly, glancing down. The dog lifted his head, eyes steady on hers. Sadie sighed. The house had always felt large, but now it felt hollow, like someone had turned off the gravity in certain rooms. She walked through them aimlessly, the sitting room, the library, the upstairs hall. Her footsteps echoed. It had only been 3 nights, 3 dinners, a few quiet conversations. So why did their absence feel like grief? She paused outside Ethan's room. Her hand rested on the doorknob. Not today, not yet. She descended to the cellar instead, gathering firewood. The scent of pine and ash clung to her sleeves. She lit the fire again out of habit, even though the temperature had risen. The crackle filled the silence, but not the space. She wasn't used to missing voices. She wasn't used to missing anything. That evening, Sadie prepared soup. Not because she was hungry, but because she couldn't sit still. She chopped vegetables too finely, stirred with too much force, and finally set the spoon down with a clatter. The silence was unbearable. She opened the drawer near the pantry, pulled out the notepad she hadn't touched in 2 years. Her pen hovered over the paper. Nothing. She closed it again. Scout, curled near the hearth, lifted his head suddenly and let out a single bark. Sadie looked up. He stood, then trotted toward the front door. Frowning, she followed, opened it. There was nothing but early evening haze and melting snow. Then she saw it, in the clearing near the road, a shape moving slowly, cautiously. A man, a truck. Ben Hollis. She didn't move. Not when the truck door opened. Not when Rosie tumbled out, her pink hat askew, and Ellie followed with her backpack bouncing behind her. Only when Ben reached the steps did she find her voice. "I thought you were gone." He stopped, held her gaze. "We were, but something didn't feel right." Sadie's fingers tightened on the doorframe. "Truck's acting up again," he added. She raised an eyebrow. "Is that true?" "No," he said with a sheepish smile. "But I figured if I told you we missed you, you might slam the door." She didn't slam it. Instead, she opened it wider. Rosie flew past her legs, already talking about how Scout had to sleep on her bed this time. Ellie hugged Sadie without asking. Arms warm, brief, but real. And Sadie, unstartled, breath caught in her chest. "Let them." Ben remained on the porch. "I can help around here," he said. "The back shed needs a new roof. The fence has holes. You said the plumbing was touchy, right?" She crossed her arms. "And in return?" "A warm room. Some soup." He looked at her. "Time. For the girls. Maybe for you." Sadie was silent. Then finally, "You can stay in the guest room. But you cook tomorrow?" Ben grinned. "Deal." She turned to go, then hesitated. "You don't have to fix anything to earn your place here, Ben." "I know," he said, "but it feels good to build something again." She disappeared down the hall. Scout barked once, circled the girls, and lay by the fire like nothing had changed. Sadie stood by the window after the girls went to bed. Outside, the snow had begun to fade in patches, revealing earth beneath. It was messy, slushy, uneven, But it was change. In her hand was Rosie's drawing, 3 stick figures. She smiled, and for the first time in years she stayed in the moment, long enough to feel the warmth coming back, not just to the house, but to herself. The snow melted faster than expected. By the 3rd day since their return, patches of brown grass emerged in the backyard like shy promises of spring. The gravel path to the barn reappeared, crunchy and wet beneath their boots. The roof above the west wing had finally stopped groaning, freed from the weight of the storm, and yet Sadie felt unease stirring, like a draft under a door she couldn't find. Ben had settled into the rhythm of the place. He fixed the broken latch on the back door, patched a leaky pipe near the laundry room, and even cleaned out the cluttered shed without being asked. He worked with quiet purpose, never overstepping, never assuming, but always present. The girls helped in their own way. Rosie arranged pine cones into little towers on the front steps, while Ellie organized the books in the library by how pretty the covers are. Their laughter echoed through rooms that had gone too long without it. It was good, too good maybe. The first sign came that morning, wrapped in plastic and tucked under the front gate. Sadie found it while letting Scout out. A newspaper, the kind she hadn't subscribed to in years, from the regional press. Her heart dropped when she saw the headline on page 2. Reclusive author resurfaces in Winter Miracle. A blurry photo beneath the title showed the house. Her house, half obscured by trees and snow, the lights on, smoke curling from the chimney. The article was short but invasive. It mentioned her full name, the mansion, her past success as a novelist. It speculated about the identity of the man and 2 young girls seen leaving the estate, and whether the famous Sadie Westmore had finally emerged from hiding. Her hands trembled as she folded the paper and shoved it deep into the wood bin beside the fireplace. But it was too late. The door opened behind her. Ben stood there holding 2 mugs of coffee. His smile faded the moment he saw her face. "What's wrong?" She handed him the paper. He read it in silence, then looked up. "I'm sorry." "You didn't do anything," she said stiffly. He set the coffee down and joined her near the fire. "How'd they find you?" Sadie shook her head. "Probably that neighbor, the one who drops off pies in December. I knew she had a cousin at the paper. I should have seen it coming." She turned away, arms folded. "I hate this," she muttered. "The spotlight, the speculation, people picking at your life like it's theirs to shape." Ben watched her for a moment, then said carefully, "You can still take it back." "What?" "Your life. You're not the story they printed. You're the one you're living now." She let out a bitter breath. "That's not how the world works. Once they smell a story, they don't stop until they've turned it inside out." Ben hesitated. "Then maybe we shouldn't stay." Sadie looked at him, startled by the bluntness of it. He met her gaze steadily. "I'd never put you in harm's way, Sadie. Not you, not your home. The girls and I, we're grateful. But if staying here means dragging your grief back into the open—" "Stop," she said sharply, then softer. "Please, don't say that." Ben fell silent. She lowered herself into the armchair beside the hearth, burying her face in her hands. "I thought I could do this. Let people in. Let you in." "You did," Ben said gently. "And look at what's happened." Sadie blinked up at him. "You made a child laugh again," he said. "You let someone read your books again. You let Scout bring us here. None of that was wrong. But now everyone knows." "So what?" he asked. "Let them guess. Let them whisper. That's all it is. Noise. It doesn't change what happened here. What's happening?" Sadie looked down. "I'm not ready to be known again." "You don't have to be known by them," he said. "Just by the people who matter." She didn't respond. A moment later, Rosie burst into the room, waving a handmade paper crown. "Miss Sadie, Ellie says you're the queen of the library now." Behind her, Ellie stood holding one of Sadie's older novels, her face lit with admiration. "Can you read this one to us tonight? The first chapter, please?" Sadie looked at them. 2 girls who weren't afraid of her shadows, who weren't asking for the Sadie Westmore of the headlines. Just the woman sitting in front of the fire. She swallowed hard. "Maybe," she said, "after dinner." The girls whooped in celebration and darted off, Scout chasing them with a happy bark. Ben sat down beside her again. They don't care about your past, he said quietly. They care that you gave them a home when no one else did. Sadie stared into the fire, the edges of her fear curling in the warmth. You're not running, are you? She asked. Ben shook his head. No, not unless you ask me to. She glanced at him, then away. Then stay, she said, voice nearly a whisper. Even if I don't know how to say it right. Ben reached over, placing his hand gently on hers. You just did. The snow was gone now. What remained were soft patches of mud and thawed earth, as if the land had exhaled after weeks of holding its breath. The sky stretched wide and open, pale with the timid arrival of spring. Birds had returned to the trees. The wind was no longer sharp, only cool, a breeze that carried the scent of wet bark and damp stone. Ben stood near the barn, a hammer in one hand, nails in the other, fixing the final beam on the back awning. He moved slowly, deliberately, not because the task required precision, but because he didn't want it to end. He could hear the girls inside the house through the open window. Ellie was reading aloud, one of Sadie's older books, her voice stumbling over longer words but full of confidence. Rosie laughed at something, high and bright. Sadie's voice responded gently, calm, encouraging. Ben smiled without meaning to, then sighed. He had to decide. The storm had been the excuse, the truck breaking down, the girls needing warmth. Then came gratitude, then came comfort. But now they were here without reason, staying without a plan. And he was a man who had lived far too long on the edge of uncertainty to not feel when it was creeping in again. That night he packed quietly. Not everything, just enough. Just the essentials. He waited until the girls were asleep, their hair still damp from their baths, their faces peaceful under soft quilts. He stood for a long moment in the doorway of the guest room, watching them breathe. Then he turned away. Downstairs, the fire was low, casting amber shadows across the stone walls. Sadie was sitting at the long table, a cup of tea in front of her, unread manuscript pages spread out beside it. She didn't look up when he entered. You're quiet tonight, she said. Ben nodded. Just thinking. She glanced at him then, eyes narrowed slightly. About what? He hesitated. About staying. About leaving. Sadie set down her pen. Are you leaving? She asked. I'm not sure, he replied. But I don't want to outstay our welcome. I never meant for this to become home, she asked quietly. He met her eyes. It feels like that. Too much, maybe. She looked down at her hands. I've never been good at knowing when to hold on, he admitted, or when to walk away. Silence stretched between them, not cold, but heavy. Sadie folded the pages in front of her. What are you afraid of, Ben? That this will end, he said. That it'll hurt the girls when it does. And if it doesn't end, she asked, if this is the beginning of something? Ben gave a soft, bitter laugh. Then that's even scarier. Sadie stood, walked slowly toward him. She didn't touch him, just stood close enough for him to feel the warmth of her presence. I can't promise I'll be perfect at this, she said. I can't promise I won't retreat sometimes. But I want to try. Ben's throat tightened. I want to protect them. That's all I've ever wanted. Then don't teach them to walk away from love, she said gently. Teach them how to stay. He didn't answer. Not then. That night he wrote a letter. Sadie, I never expected to find peace in the middle of a blizzard. I came here trying to survive the next night, the next breath. You gave us something more than shelter. You gave us belonging. But I've lived too long with loss to not recognize the risk of attachment. I'm afraid of building something just to watch it fall. But maybe I'm more afraid of what happens if I walk away from the best thing that's ever happened to me. I'm leaving this letter because I need a moment to think without the weight of eyes or expectations. If you want us to stay, you won't have to say a word. Just leave the porch light on. Ben. The next morning, Sadie woke to silence. The guest room was empty. The truck was gone. She found the letter on the mantel. Her hands trembled as she read it. Once, twice. Then without a coat, without shoes, she walked barefoot across the porch and turned on the light, just as the first rays of sun crested the trees. 15 minutes later, tires crunched down the gravel. Ben stepped out of the truck, eyes searching. Sadie stood on the porch, arms crossed, her face unreadable. You said nothing, he said. I didn't have to, she replied. He stepped closer. So? You want us here? I want you, she said, and the girls. And Scout seems to think you belong. Ben smiled. Scout's got good instincts. I'm still scared, she admitted. So am I. He climbed the stairs, and for the first time, they didn't part. The pen felt heavy at first. It had been 2 years since Sadie Westmore had written a full sentence that wasn't a grocery list or a polite note taped to the front gate. 2 years since her fingers had danced across a page with purpose, with belief. 2 years since she'd stopped seeing stories because hers had ended. But now in the quiet hour before sunrise, something had changed. Sadie sat at the old writing desk by the library window. A thin stream of light touched the frost-covered glass, the world outside suspended in that silvery calm that always came before daybreak. Scout lay curled beneath the radiator, softly snoring. The house was still, warm, and her heart, though still tender, was open. She had no outline, no deadline, no editor breathing down her neck, no publisher waiting. She wrote because she had to. She began not with a plot, but with a memory. A man with snow in his hair, carrying a sleeping child through a blizzard. A golden dog. A house on a hill that had once known laughter and would know it again. The words came slow, then fast. Hesitant, then certain. Her fingers found rhythm like old muscles remembering their strength. She didn't stop to correct, didn't pause to reread. She simply wrote. By the time the sun had fully risen, 20 pages lay beside her, slightly uneven, ink still drying at the edges. She looked at them, stunned. Then she smiled. Ben found her there an hour later, still barefoot, still wrapped in the oversized sweater she always wore when she wasn't ready to face the world. Have you been up all night? He asked gently. Sadie turned, blinking at the light pouring through the window. Not all night, just long enough. He noticed the pages. Is that new? She nodded. It's something. I don't know what yet, but it's mine. Ben walked closer, picking up the top sheet. He read the first paragraph silently, then looked at her. It's beautiful. She gave him a skeptical glance. You're biased. Maybe, but I've read your old work too. This feels different, like it's written from a place that isn't haunted anymore. Sadie looked down, fingers tracing the edge of the page. Maybe it's written from a place that finally allowed light in. Ben leaned in, kissed the top of her head, and said nothing more. Word of the new manuscript spread faster than Sadie expected. She hadn't planned to tell anyone, not even her agent. But Ellie had spotted the pages on the desk one afternoon and proudly declared at dinner, Miss Sadie's writing a book about us. Sadie blushed. It's loosely based on us. Ben raised a brow. Loosely, huh? Is the main character also a single dad with a broken truck and 2 wild daughters who take over the library? Rosie grinned. And a dog that's secretly magic? Sadie laughed. Maybe. But somehow, a week later, her old agent called. Apparently someone had tipped her off. A neighbor, perhaps, or a fan who still kept tabs. The woman's voice had trembled with excitement. Sadie, you don't understand. Your readers still talk about you. They need this story. I'm not sure I'm ready, Sadie replied. You don't have to be ready. You just have to keep writing. The days took on a new rhythm. Sadie wrote in the mornings. Ben worked outside, clearing out brush, repainting the barn's doors, rebuilding the back fence. The girls took over the library and Sadie's heart simultaneously, staging puppet shows, drawing murals, and sneaking cookies from the pantry. There were still quiet moments, still nights when Sadie stared at the ceiling, afraid of what would happen if it all disappeared. But she no longer let fear dictate her choices. She had chosen to open the door once. She had chosen to stay. 3 weeks after the first chapter, Sadie printed the completed manuscript. The title came naturally, The Man with Snow in His Hair. She held it in her hands and felt something unlock. Not just the story, but herself. This is the first one, she said to Ben, that I've written not to escape something, but to honor it. Ben nodded. And it shows. She sent it to her agent with a trembling hand. No guarantees, she told her. Only that this one matters. The agent called the next day in tears. Sadie, it's your best work. The publisher offered to buy it within the week. No rewrites, no edits. They wanted it as is. Sadie said yes, not because she needed the money or the recognition, but because the story had been born in truth and it deserved to live in the world. And for the first time in a long time, she looked forward to seeing her name on a shelf again. Not because it meant she was back, but because it meant she had never really left. The hills of Montana were waking. Golden light spilled across the meadow behind the estate, catching on blades of new grass and the soft blossoms just beginning to peek through the soil. Spring had arrived slowly, almost shyly, one warm breeze at a time. The snow was a memory now, buried deep in the forest's roots. On the front porch of the stone house, Sadie sat in her rocking chair, Scout curled beside her, ears flicking in the morning sun. She held a cup of coffee in both hands, steam rising to meet her smile. Inside, the house was alive. Ellie's voice floated through the screen door as she read from Charlotte's Web, her current favorite. Rosie sang off-key in the kitchen, mixing pancake batter with wild, joyful abandon. Ben's baritone laugh rumbled above the din, and the scent of bacon drifted into the open air, like an invitation. Sadie had never imagined this life. Not in the years before Ethan. Not in the dark months after. Not until a knock in the middle of a snowstorm had changed everything. She closed her eyes, breathing in the moment. It was real. It was hers. Later that morning, the four of them walked into town for the first time as a family. The path through the woods had dried into a firm dirt trail. Rosie held Sadie's hand the whole way, while Ellie skipped ahead, with Scout chasing her like a shadow. Ben kept a basket slung over one shoulder, a quiet picnic packed for the creek that ran just past the general store. The townspeople noticed them, of course. Sadie hadn't shown her face in public for years. Some heads turned with curiosity, others with kindness, a few with questions. But it didn't matter. She stood tall, Ben beside her, the girls surrounding her like a halo of innocence and light. They stopped at the bookshop first. The owner, a woman in her 70s with thick glasses and a lavender cardigan, nearly dropped her teacup when she saw Sadie walk in. "My lord, it's you," she whispered. "I thought you'd vanished." Sadie smiled gently. "For a while I did." The woman rushed forward and grasped both her hands. "The new book? It's magnificent. I stayed up all night. I cried. I laughed. I haven't felt like that reading in years." Sadie's voice caught. "Thank you." The woman leaned in, lowering her voice. "And the ending, it felt so true. I almost wonder if it really happened." Sadie glanced over at Ben, who stood at the back of the store holding Rosie on his hip and helping Ellie look through a bin of children's books. "It did," she said. "They spent the afternoon by the water, sunlight dancing on the ripples like gold coins." Ben taught the girls how to skip stones while Sadie laid out the picnic. Rosie smeared jelly on her cheeks and declared herself queen of sandwiches. Scout barked at a drifting butterfly and promptly fell into the creek. Laughter rose into the air, caught in the wind, and carried across the valley. Sadie watched them, heart full. At one point, Ben sat beside her, water glistening on his forearms. He looked at her, not like a guest, not like someone passing through, but like a man who'd found his anchor. "Did you ever think it would look like this?" he asked. Sadie shook her head, smiling through the quiet tears that touched her eyes. "Not in a million years." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. "I used to think healing was about getting back what I lost," she said. "But it's not. It's about making space for what wants to come in." "Sahti," Ben nodded, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "You made space for us. You brought life back to this house." They sat together, hands entwined, as the sun lowered toward the horizon. That night, the house glowed from every window. Ellie insisted on setting the table with candles, like a fancy restaurant, and Rosie made name cards from folded construction paper. Scout got a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon under the table, and no one objected. After dinner, they all moved to the sitting room. Ben picked up a guitar he'd found in the attic weeks ago, long out of tune but charmingly so, and strummed a slow, gentle tune. Rosie fell asleep first, her head in Sadie's lap. Ellie nodded off moments later, curled beside Scout. Sadie looked at them, then at Ben. "I never thought I'd have this again." You didn't just have it, he said. You made it. She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. You still thinking of leaving one day? Ben chuckled softly. Not a chance. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the trees rustled in the breeze. The stars began to appear. One, then three, then too many to count. And in the center of that quiet, joyful world, a woman who had once locked her heart behind grief sat beside a man who had once believed he'd lost his way. And together they kept watch over the new life they had built. Not perfect, not polished, but real and safe and wholly their own. Years later, readers across the country would write letters to Sadie Westmer, thanking her for the man with snow in his hair, saying it saved them in ways she'd never understand. But the truth was, the book hadn't saved them. It had saved her. And that, she would come to believe, was the most miraculous story of all. We'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment and let us know your city or country. It always warms our hearts to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoyed this journey of hope, healing, and unexpected love, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story. From all of us here, thank you for spending your time with us today. Until next time, take care, and never stop believing in the quiet magic of kindness.